The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my Manhattan office, the city lights twinkling 40 floors below. Mom's voice cracked through the phone, heavy with desperation I'd never heard before. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk. It's about the vineyard." I set down my pen, already knowing this conversation would shatter the careful distance I'd maintained from Willowbrook Vineyards for the past 8 years. "What about it, Mom?" "We're in trouble." Real trouble. "Marcus, he made some decisions." Of course he did. Marcus, my golden child brother, 2 years younger but eternally favored, had been handed our family's century-old vineyard on a silver platter when he turned 25. Meanwhile, I'd been politely told that my corporate skills would be better used elsewhere, that the vineyard needed someone with passion and vision. Translation: Marcus was the son, and sons inherited the family legacy. "How much trouble?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "We need $100,000 by next Friday, or we lose everything." The number hung in the air like smoke from a wildfire. I'd worked 16-hour days for 8 years, clawing my way up from junior analyst to vice president at one of New York's most prestigious investment firms. I'd sacrificed relationships, missed family gatherings, and built a nest egg that could sustain me through any storm. And now they wanted me to hand it over to save the mess Marcus had created. "I see," I said carefully. "And Marcus can't handle this himself?" Mom's silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, He's not in a position to help right now." That weekend, I drove upstate to the vineyard for the first time in 3 years. The October countryside blazed with autumn colors, but Willowbrook looked tired. The main house's paint was peeling, several fence posts were broken, and the tasting room's open sign hung crooked. This wasn't just financial trouble. This was systematic neglect. I found Marcus in the cellar, supposedly checking the wine barrels, though the bottle of our premium Cabernet in his hand suggested otherwise. At 29, he still had that boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life, but there were new lines around his eyes and a softness around his middle that spoke of too many liquid lunches. "Sarah, God, you look successful." He gestured vaguely at my tailored suit. "Very New York." "Marcus," I kept my voice neutral. "Mom says you need $100,000. His face flushed. "It's not like it sounds." I had everything under control until the Peterson deal fell through. And then there was the equipment failure, and the insurance company is being difficult about the storm damage from last spring. I walked past him to examine the barrels, running my finger along surfaces that should have been pristine but were dusty with neglect. "What about the new vineyard expansion Dad mentioned? The one that was supposed to triple our production?" Marcus took a long swig from the bottle. That's part of the problem." Over the next hour, the truth emerged like wine from a broken barrel. Marcus had borrowed against the vineyard's equity to fund a massive expansion, new vines, state-of-the-art equipment, a renovated tasting room. But instead of managing the project carefully, he'd treated the loan money like a personal slush fund. Expensive dinners, a new truck, a boat he'd bought for client entertainment, but used mainly for weekend parties with his college buddies. The Peterson deal, a contract to supply wine to a major restaurant chain, had been real, but Marcus had lost it through sheer incompetence. He'd missed delivery deadlines, provided inconsistent quality, and ultimately been dropped in favor of a more reliable supplier. Without that income, the loan payments had become impossible. "How much do you actually owe?" I asked. Marcus mumbled something into the wine bottle. "How much, Marcus?" $300,000. "But if we can make the payment next Friday, they'll restructure the loan. Give us more time." I felt the familiar burn of injustice that had defined our relationship since childhood. When Marcus crashed Dad's car at 17, They bought him a new one and said boys will be boys. When I got a full scholarship to Columbia, they mentioned it was nice that I wouldn't be a financial burden. When Marcus barely graduated from state school, they threw him a party and handed him the keys to our family's legacy. I need to see the books, I said. Sarah, you don't understand the wine business. I understand numbers and balance sheets. And what happens when someone confuses a business with their personal piggy bank? That night, I spread the Vineyard's financial records across the dining room table where we'd eaten Sunday dinners as children. The picture they painted was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just been reckless, he'd been systematically draining the Vineyard's resources for years. Equipment repairs deferred, employee wages delayed, supplier payments stretched until vendors refused credit. The expansion loan had been the final straw, but the Vineyard had been bleeding money long before that. My parents found me there at midnight, still working through the maze of mismanagement. "Will you help us, sweetheart?" Dad asked, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. At 72, he looked every day of his age. Mom stood behind him, her hands twisted in her apron, the same nervous gesture she'd had since my childhood. I looked at these two people who'd raised me, loved me in their imperfect way, and yet had never quite seen me as equal to my brother. "If I give you this money, what's to stop Marcus from running through it the same way he did the loan money?" "He's learned his lesson," Mom said quickly. "Haven't you, Marcus?" My brother, swaying slightly in the doorway, nodded eagerly. "Absolutely." This was a wake-up call. I'll do better. The lie sat heavy in the room. We all knew Marcus had been having wake-up calls his entire adult life, each one followed by another disaster that someone else had to clean up. "I'll give you the money," I said finally, and watched relief flood their faces. "But I have conditions." The negotiations took until dawn. By the time the sun rose over the vineyard, painting the autumn vines gold and crimson, I had what I needed: 51% ownership of Willowbrook Vineyards in exchange for my $100,000, plus an agreement to restructure the existing debt. Marcus protested. "Of course. That's not fair. This is my vineyard." "You're welcome to buy out my share any time," I replied calmly. "At fair market value." We all knew he'd never be able to do that. My parents were uncomfortable with the arrangement, but desperate enough to agree. The lawyers drew up the paperwork within days, and by Thursday, I was the majority owner of the vineyard I'd grown up on, but never been allowed to inherit. I took a leave of absence from my job and moved back to Willowbrook that November. The first order of business was a complete audit of operations, followed by some difficult conversations with suppliers and creditors. My MBA and 8 years in finance had taught me how to read between the lines of financial statements, and what I found was a business that could be saved if managed properly. Marcus, meanwhile, struggled with his new reality. No longer the sole heir apparent, he was now the minority partner in his own inheritance, answerable to his older sister, who'd never shown proper respect for his agricultural expertise. "You can't just waltz in here and change everything," he complained when I fired his drinking buddy who'd been drawing a salary as marketing director while doing nothing but organizing wine tastings that were really just parties. "This isn't some soulless corporation. We have traditions." "Traditions don't pay loans," I replied, reviewing the personnel files. Half the staff were Marcus's friends or drinking companions, hired based on loyalty rather than competence. And neither does nostalgia. The changes came quickly. I renegotiated supplier contracts, implemented proper inventory controls, and established quality standards that actually meant something. The tasting room was renovated, not with expensive flourishes, but with smart improvements that enhanced the customer experience while controlling costs. Most importantly, I took control of the finances. Marcus would receive a salary like any other employee, but he could no longer make financial decisions without my approval. Every expenditure over $500 required my signature. The transformation was painful but necessary. By spring, the vineyard was operating in the black for the first time in years. We'd regained 3 major supplier relationships and landed 2 new restaurant contracts. The wine quality improved dramatically once I insisted on proper cellar management and consistent production standards. But Marcus grew increasingly resentful. He'd gone from lord of the manor to a highly supervised employee in the space of 6 months. His friends stopped visiting when the free-flowing wine ended. His casual approach to work hours was challenged when I implemented actual schedules and accountability measures. The breaking point came in June, during our busy wedding season. Marcus had been assigned to oversee a high-profile wedding, the kind of event that could generate significant referrals if handled well. Instead, he'd spent the afternoon drinking with the groomsmen and had to be physically restrained from making inappropriate comments during the ceremony. I fired him the next morning. "You can't fire me!" he shouted, red-faced and reeking of hangover. "I'm family. This is my vineyard." "You're a minority shareholder and an employee," I corrected. "And as an employee, your performance has been unacceptable. You're welcome to remain as a minority shareholder, but you no longer work here." The family meeting that followed was apocalyptic. My parents accused me of betraying family loyalty. Marcus threatened to sue. Mom cried. Dad withdrew into the kind of disappointed silence that had once made me desperate to earn his approval. "This isn't what we agreed to," Mom said. "You were supposed to help save the vineyard, not steal it from your brother." "I saved it," I replied. "The vineyard is profitable, the loans are current, and we have a waiting list for our wines. If that's not what you wanted, you should have been clearer about your priorities." Marcus moved back to the city, taking a job at a friend's startup and posting bitter social media updates about family betrayal and corporate greed. My parents barely spoke to me, despite the fact that their retirement was now secure thanks to the vineyard's improved finances. But I wasn't done. Over the next 2 years, I expanded Willowbrook's operations carefully and strategically. We added a small restaurant featuring farm-to-table dining. I partnered with local hotels to offer wine country packages. We began hosting corporate retreats and private events. Each expansion was planned, budgeted, and executed with the kind of precision that Marcus had never been capable of. The vineyard that had been hemorrhaging money when I took control was now generating 7-figure annual revenues. Property values in our area had risen partly due to the success of wineries like ours. The Willowbrook brand had gone from local curiosity to regional destination. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling. The startup had failed. His next job lasted 6 months before he was let go for attendance issues. He'd moved in with a college friend and was working part-time at a wine shop, telling anyone who'd listen about how his sister had cheated him out of his birthright. The final act began with a phone call on a crisp October morning, exactly 3 years after that first desperate conversation. This time it was Dad calling, his voice carefully controlled. "Sarah, we need to talk. About the vineyard, about arrangements." I found them in the same dining room where I'd first laid out Marcus's financial disasters. But now the table held glossy brochures for assisted living facilities and long-term care options. Mom looked frail, Dad diminished. The weight of caring for her increasing dementia symptoms was taking its toll on both of them. "We've been thinking about selling our shares," Dad said without preamble. "Maybe moving somewhere with better medical facilities for your mother." Their combined 49% of the vineyard was worth nearly $2 million now, thanks to the improvements I'd made. It would fund a comfortable retirement and excellent care for Mom's condition. I'd be interested in buying your shares, I said carefully. At fair market value. Dad nodded slowly. There's just one thing. Marcus? He's been having a hard time. We were wondering if there might be a place for him here, maybe as a manager or something. He has family, after all. I looked out the window at the vines heavy with grapes, the renovated tasting room where guests were sampling our award-winning Pinot Noir, the restaurant deck where servers were setting tables for the evening service. Everything I'd built, everything I'd saved and improved and made profitable through careful planning and hard work. No, I said quietly. There isn't. The silence that followed was profound. Mom looked confused, her mind already drifting to whatever distant shore her memories had found. Dad's face showed disappointment, but also perhaps a grudging respect for my decision. He's your brother, Dad said finally, and he had his chance. He had every advantage, every opportunity, and he squandered them all. I won't let him destroy what I've built. The sale was finalized by Christmas. My parents moved to a beautiful assisted living community in the city, close to the medical specialists Mom needed. I became the sole owner of Willowbrook Vineyards. Marcus wasn't invited to the signing ceremony. That spring, I stood in the vineyard at dawn, watching the morning mist rise from the valley. The vines were budding with new growth, and in the distance, I could hear the sounds of our staff preparing for another day. There were wine releases to manage, events to coordinate, and the endless details of running a successful business. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hope you're happy with what you've done. I deleted it without responding and walked toward the tasting room, where a group of wine enthusiasts from California was scheduled for a private tasting of